Hi, I'm Mary Greendale, and welcome to another edition of Just Thinking. Today we're going to be talking about wildfires, forest wildfires. And we all know what's going on in California, and so I got to thinking, what could happen here? What do we need to know here? And with that in mind, I went to a dear old friend, Chief Cassidy, Michael Cassidy, Holliston's fire chief, but also Holliston's director of emergency management. So wearing both those hats, we're going to have a conversation. Now, we need to start with the fact that 25% of Holliston is in land that is protected in perpetuity as woodland and open space. And some of that land is for recreation areas. Some of that land is just wild, okay? Lots of woods. And those woods happen to back up to houses in many cases. Obviously not the middle of the woods. But I happen to live on the periphery of one of those large chunks of preserved and protected land, all of which I love. I'm not complaining about this, but it's like, what do I need to know? The fire, in my case, would only be coming from the rear, in all likelihood. But what do I need to know about taking care of that property, and what do we have to address in terms of cleaning up? I hear a lot about cleaning up brush and debris and that kind of stuff, and wow, that would be a full-time job. But anyway, so let's start with that. Welcome, first of all.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. Always happy to have you here. So what does a homeowner have to think about? First of all, make sure you have insurance. Let's start with that, okay? Check your insurance policies. Now, what do we need to think about for protecting our house in the event that a wildfire or forest fire of some size comes our way?
Absolutely. So there are programs out there. The NFPA Firewise USA would be the gold standard across the country.
NFPA would be National
Fire Protection Association.
There we go.
Located in nearby Quincy, Massachusetts.
Oh, really?
But they are they're the standards authority on fire service and life safety standards. So they have a program called Firewise USA, and they offer a lot of tips for homeowners and communities on how they can be firewise. And one of those programs talks about defensible space around your home. And so you want to make sure that you've cut back the growth of any shrubs or trees on your property up to a certain height, up to like 6 feet for a lot of the trees around your house. And then as you get closer to the home itself, instead of having shrubs or other plant-based products or even wood chips right up against the foundation, they suggest that you have something that's not going to burn, something like gravel, which, again, it's an aesthetic change that around here isn't the norm, but in other parts of the country, it's much more common to have gravel or stone right up against the foundation as opposed to plantings. And unfortunately, a lot of the wood chips that are sold in this area have been impregnated with products that make them even more flammable. The coloring that everyone loves actually makes the wood burn faster.
So when I know I use a ground leaf mulch kind of thing. I'm going to guess that's maybe a tad better than having something that's been artificially altered to flame better, or?
Natural is not going to be as bad as the things that have additives, but again, a natural wood substance will burn as well.
Even if it's ground up leaves. Okay, I have to keep that in mind.
Yeah, and leaves is very are very flammable, and we'll get into that when we talk about burning regulations.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So within the fire NFPA, do they actually consult with and talk with landscapers? Do they ever have forums and, conversations with people who are designing these things?
Yeah, if a community were to go for the Firewise USA designation, there would be a lot of public outreach, and there would be community fora, and there would be educational materials, and they would work with the folks that are in that space, because obviously you don't want a policy decision for a community that says, we are going to take steps to make our community more resistant to the impact of wildfire, to suddenly have an unintentional impact of putting landscapers out of business because now no one wants certain treatments in their yards anymore. So there needs to be a balance. So obviously they would work with the folks that do the work.
What happens if you put like plastic underneath, just underneath the stone, so the weeds don't keep coming up?
That's fine.
But the plastics then release all those little whatever stuff in the air.
Only if they
Catch fire.
Correct, which hopefully you've had
Precluded
other barriers in your yard to prevent the flames from getting that close to your house, that the plastic underneath the 5 feet of gravel would get impacted.
Okay, so will grass burn?
Grass absolutely burns.
It does. So if you have a long thingy of grass and you're thinking that's a deterrent, it's not a deterrent.
So it depends on the moisture content of the grass, and that was one of the problems we saw this past fall with all of the fires around the Commonwealth, is because of the drought conditions, there were so many ground fuels that were easily catching fire, whether it was on the side of the road when someone had carelessly disposed of a cigarette, but grass does burn.
When we were digging in the yard when it was really dry, under the ground by a foot, it was still warm. The sun, there was nothing to keep the sun from not heating up so a foot down, it was hot. Yeah, it was really dry. It was really dry. So when we're talking about other barriers, you said you hope you've had enough barriers. So what are the other barriers I can consider?
So again, there are different zones. You've got your immediate zone, and then you've got your extended zone. So 0 to 5 feet around the house is your immediate. The intermediate is 5 to 30, and then your extended zone is 30 to 100 feet. And that's where you want to be very intentional about what you're placing in those different zones. And it's not just going to be plantings, but you don't want to have decorations. This is a problem that I see as someone who's in the business of fighting fires all year round. I see people put things around their homes, around their front doors, that could very, very easily catch fire. In the fall, people are putting the scarecrows and the things that are made from dried out corn stalks, and those catch fire very easily. Then we move into the winter months, and people are putting wreaths and other things that, again, with just the right spark and the right conditions, can very easily contribute to flame spread.
And then we leave them there until at least Valentine's Day and maybe later, so that we're sure they're really dry. Right. Oh, yes, yes. So what do we have for history of wildfires here, or forest fires, I guess is what we call them here, because they never get wild.
True. We've got a rich history of brush fires here in Holliston. I know under my predecessor, there were quite a few fires up in the Adams Street area of town. Adams Street, Hopkinton, Milford, we all were having a lot of fires in the late 90s, early 2000s. There was a state task force that was involved. There were multiple state and federal agencies that were involved in investigating the cause. I know my predecessor spent a lot of time in the woods, as did his counterpart in Milford, just spending time in like a tree stand, watching who was coming in and out of the woods, trying to find out the human cause for many of those fires. So when I first started with the department as fighting fires, we were in the woods a lot. I remember one year we almost didn't make it to town meeting in May because we'd been 6 or 8 hours in the woods off of Adams Street. That's not the only spot that we've had significant forest fires here in town. We've had off of Highland Street. We had one a couple of years ago that backed up. We accessed it from Winter Street, but it also could have been accessed from either Mellon or from Highland. We've got sections of the high tension lines in off of Northway Street where we've had quite a few fires over the years. And that goes to, there are different things that are causing some of these fires. I alluded to the fact that there was a task force involved in trying to find out the cause of some of those fires that were happening in the Holliston, Hopkinton, Milford triangle. there was a lot of human cause for some of those fires. But when you get underneath the high tension lines, sometimes it's caused by technology. If there's a wire that comes down and the brush is dry, then that can catch, fire. But also sometimes it's people who are out in the woods, either having a campfire or using dirt bikes without spark arresters, and so that can cause a fire. So depending on which part of town that we're in, and depending on how close it is to residential areas, sometimes can help us figure out what caused the fire.
Spark arresters.
Yes.
On a dirt bike.
On a dirt bike.
How many have spark arresters?
Well, when they're purchased from the manufacturer, they have them. Sometimes they're taken off.
Because?
For people who are in the dirt bike riding enthusiast circles, it gives them a better user experience.
Okay, all right. So I do remember that period of time when we had that series of fires. If I recall correctly, there was a lot of discussion about arson and so forth, and back and forth and up and down. It was pretty scary, actually, because they were out there all the time. It just seemed like an endless.
Early on, shortly after I got promoted to chief, we actually had a 300-acre brush fire up in the Adams Street area, and that was pretty significant for us. And that also was significant in the state at that time. We were one of a couple communities that time that had big fires going on. And again, when the conditions are right, it's not usually limited to just one community in the Commonwealth. Oftentimes there are a lot of, pardon the expression, but hotspots.
Yeah. Right, but so it's sort of a clue. It's a hint that you have an anomaly. There's something a little bit weird. You have one fire and nobody else is burning, and we might look at this a little different. Okay, got it. So burning permits, and I do know that we're in the burning season right now.
January 15th to April 30th.
Okay, January 15th, April 30th. You've got to remember those dates. I know that it is so frustrating. You get to May 15th, and now you've just got this last pile of, whatever. Are those dates arbitrary?
No, those are set by the state. It's in the guidelines that come from the Commonwealth, and it is not movable. We've had years where March, April, it's very, very dry, and so there are a lot of days where we haven't been allowing burning, and then it might rain for a week or two in mid to late April, and folks are imploring us, will you please extend the burning season? We don't have that authority. And a lot of it has to do with the burning permits come not only under fire regulations, but also air quality regulations. And so it has to do with the dispersion of the smoke and the products of combustion. And that's why by the time you get to the beginning of May, the products of combustion aren't dispersing into the atmosphere as well. And therefore, if you were to be burning, then you're going to be causing more air quality complaints for neighbors and other abutters to where the burning operations are taking place.
Okay. When you get a permit, are you specific about what you're using it for?
So the permit is very restricted as to what you can and cannot use it for. It has to be only for forestry debris. You cannot be putting construction materials in there. You can't be burning cardboard. You can't be burning things that came out of your basement because you're cleaning it out. It has to only be forestry debris. So that would be prunings, cuttings, clippings from trees. It has to be on the land where those came from. So you can't be running a commercial landscaping operation and bringing that material to the home where you live and burning it. It has to be 75 feet from a dwelling. You have to have sufficient aids available to contain or extinguish the blaze, which normally means a pressurized water source and a shovel or a hoe or some other tool so that if it starts to get out of control, you can control it. But at no time can you burn leaves. Leaves is always prohibited because the problem is when the leaves catch on fire, because they're so light and they're taken up through
Yeah.
the smoke, they then will travel, and you can end up causing a fire in someone else's yard.
Yeah, it's the traveling stuff. It's the embers being blown by 100-mile-an-hour winds that are the things I think we're perhaps becoming a little more aware of by listening to the news.
And the burning with a permit on days that it's permissible in a particular community is only between the hours of 10 and 4. And again, that has to do with the dispersion. You want to get it started, early in the morning, but you want to make sure that it's out at a certain point in the afternoon, and it has to be completely out. Oftentimes, people think they got it out, and then police on routine patrol, a neighbor, someone looks over and says, "There's a glow in my neighbor's yard," and we look up on the list and we see, oh yes, they had a burning permit yesterday, or they had a burning permit earlier today, and we'll have to try and make sure that that gets extinguished properly.
Yeah. How does one deal with the effects in the air? I mean, you talked about air quality. I mean, who's measuring, or what do you do? How do you monitor that, I guess, is what I'm trying to
So
get at.
it's the Department of Environmental Protection, the Mass DEP, that weighs in as to whether air quality conditions are satisfactory for burning in a particular region. So there are times where they will say burning is permissible statewide, or they may say burning is permissible in these districts, maybe the eastern districts towards the coast, but there may be poorer air quality in the western counties, and so they may say you can't be burning in those districts today. And so on a daily basis, the DEP is providing guidance to local fire departments so that they can make an informed decision, because the decision whether or not burning will take place in a community on a given day is the responsibility of the fire chief or fire warden. Oftentimes, the fire chief has been designated by the appointing authority as the forest warden for that community. And it's to be based on the fire factors, but also the meteorological conditions. So even if we felt, oh, the winds aren't too heavy, it's not too hot, looks good from a fire standpoint, if DEP says air quality is a no-go, we can't issue the permits.
Got it.
And
I was
we-
just going to ask you that question.
Yeah, so we can't override the
DEP.
no. And there are guidelines which help the local officials make those decisions. They're not made in an arbitrary or capricious fashion. It's based on the science, but it's weighing both the meteorological as well as the fire conditions, because it is a quality of life issue. If the air conditions are such that the dispersion isn't occurring and the smoke isn't going up in the atmosphere, then for folks who have underlying health conditions where breathing may be a problem to begin with, if all of that smoke and all of that particulate matter is staying low to the ground, then it's going to impact them doing their normal activities. I mean, we saw this past fall when there were so many acres in the Commonwealth burning that we were getting complaints about just the odor of smoke. But as you went closer to some of those large fires that were taking place, there were people that, if you operated a daycare, you couldn't let the children outside for recess. If you were, had certain health conditions, you couldn't go to the grocery store or go to, a worship service at your of your choosing, because you just couldn't go outside because it was so overwhelming. So it really is a quality of life issue, and that's why these burning regulations have to do with burning of forestry debris with a permit. But even when it comes to somebody having a chimenea or somebody having a fire in their backyard in a fire pit, and we get a phone call, someone says, I smell smoke, we go out, we investigate. If their use of the chimenea or a fire pit is interfering with a neighbor enjoying their own property, by statute, we can require them to put out that fire in the fire pit or the chimenea.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay. So, but we don't have to call up to get a permit just to do a fire pit burn.
So if you were having a cooking fire No permit is required by statute. So that's for a cooking fire. But you want to make sure that if you claim that you're having a cooking fire, that you have something nearby that you can show to the officer who shows up that you are about to cook and consume something. S'mores.
S'mores are okay?
They're great.
Okay.
They're lovely.
Okay. All right. So, but we do have to worry about the neighbors. I mean, if we have a fire that's going and it is disturbing somebody else's comfort, then their comfort trumps my burning pit.
Absolutely. And I'll give you an example. The fire department responded on New Year's Eve to a residence. A neighbor had called in concerned that they could see flames through the woods.
Oh.
And we went, and there were some folks who were celebrating the New Year, and they were burning pellets in a pit.
Yeah.
Not a true fire pit, but literally just dug, earth had been dug out. But pellets can never be burned because they are considered to be construction materials. And so we told them that there were two choices. They could put them out or we would put them out. But because of the carcinogens and the other products that would be released from pellets being burned as an air quality violation, we could tell them to put that out.
What about the bonfire?
So, by statute, a community is allowed to have one ceremonial bonfire per year. It does need to be permitted, and it can only take place during certain times of the year or for certain holiday occasions. It can't just randomly happen on a
4th of July.
Well, that would be one of them.
It's one. Okay.
But it couldn't just be a random Tuesday in March.
Okay. Okay.
So the bonfire that took place on New Year's Eve for the down at the community farm, that was permitted. Fire department personnel were on scene to make sure that that was extinguished, and yes, but that still has those same issues of those materials that are being burned. It's not healthy to breathe that in.
Yeah. So then I sort of ask in my own head, do I really ever want to go to that? Anyway, okay, so we have a map, and I don't know if I can manage to figure out whether or not we can get to see that. Okay, we got a map. There it is. So all of those green areas are the protected areas that we have in town, and then the yellow areas are recreation areas. So in essence, those are all places where you probably got a lot of woods and open space. Now, some of those areas do not have town water. Specifically Highland Street, where we have that new Audubon sanctuary going in, okay, on Highland Street. There is no town water. What do we do then? Very, very curious about this because my house backs right up to this, so this question's very personal. Okay.
Sure. So fortunately, 91% of the town is protected by the municipal water distribution system. There are hydrants within a 660-foot distance of the paved roadways. Then you get into those areas that you specified where there aren't roads leading to a lot of those areas. And so not only the area that you mentioned on Highland Street, but also as I look at the map, a lot of the section there up off of Hanlon Road, Adams Street, we've spent a lot of time in there.
Yeah.
So we need to bring our own water. And there are a couple ways that we can do that. We have small forest fire trucks, F450s, 350s, with a couple 100-gallon water tank on it that we can bring into the woods, provided the paths have been cleared after things have fallen during the winter. And as long as it's wide enough and we can make the clearance over some of the rocks, we can bring a pump and water closer to where the fire might be. We can establish a water source sometimes in the woods. Sometimes there are streams where we can draft the water out and we can, through a pump, send that out to hoses to be able to fight the fire. And a couple times during my career, we've had to use air resources. You've seen those a lot in California. We haven't had the large planes that are dropping the retardant, but we've had helicopters which are either from the state police or the National Guard, which have dropped a bucket in a nearby static water source, flown to Holliston, and then dumped in a specific pattern, trying to help us protect key assets. Like we've used them in Adams Street because it was getting a little bit too close to properties. And then the other thing that we have are tankers, and so we can go to the nearest hydrant, we can fill the tanker, and then we can bring the tanker into the woods. We can dump it into a pool that we set up, from which we then draft and then feed those smaller forest fire trucks and the hoses.
That sounds like a lot of work.
It is, which is why we almost missed town meeting that night, because it's a big production.
You had one that,
When you need to set up a water supply, if you're doing a tanker shuttle, that takes a lot of effort and a lot of coordination too, because a lot of times the access roads into these areas not really designed for two-way traffic, and so you need to have somebody who's coordinating. Okay, the Upton tanker is on their way out. When they, get to the street, send in the Milford tanker, and so there's a lot of coordination that takes place.
So, thinking in terms of the roadways or whatever, the access roads, and I remember you talking about those for like planning board when you're setting up a new property or something like that. So you've got these access roads. Who maintains those?
So if it's on town land, the town maintains it, and so not uncommon for us to reach out and ask for permission to be able to do some clearing on some of the roads in off of Adams Street to make sure that if we need to get up in there, we can. If it's private property, it's the responsibility of the homeowner or landowner. And in a pinch, in real time, sometimes we'll take measures that we need to. If we're trying to get down a path and something fell during the previous winter and whoever is responsible hasn't cleared it yet, most of our brush apparatus have chainsaws on them, and our folks are pretty well skilled in the use of chainsaws. And we work very closely with the Department of Conservation and Recreation, Bureau of Forest Fire Control. They have specialized forestry resources staged throughout the Commonwealth. Closest resource for us would be coming out of Hopkinton, but we train with them on an either every year or every other year basis, just to make sure that our firefighters know proper techniques for felling trees, know what equipment they should be bringing with them, how they should be dressing when they're leaving to go to a fire in the woods. Just a reminder about safety for everyone.
Yeah, but that just makes it. Fires are bad enough, but it just makes it so much more complicated. You used to do things like scheduled burns and that kind of stuff in woodlands because oftentimes it's healthier for the woodland. An occasional burn here and there.
Right.
Do we do those anymore?
We do not do prescribed burns. The state does some prescribed burns. The U.S. Department of Agriculture does controlled burns. In the Commonwealth, they do them down towards the Cape. But we don't do them up in this region anymore. A lot has to do with where we are such a populated area.
So dense.
If we're burning, then that smoke's going somewhere, and the ideal conditions to do a prescribed burn aren't necessarily when you would be doing open burning. So if you have a hypervigilant society who has now become extremely nervous about smelling smoke, it doesn't matter how many times we've done public messaging and you've done outreach and explained to people we're going to be doing this activity on this day, weather permitting, you still get a lot of calls from people who are very nervous.
Well, that's a whole different issue. Okay. And then, was there anything else about the fire stuff that we've left out that I've forgotten, that we've overlooked, or whatever?
No, it's just, as we know, our conversation here today was birthed out of what happened in California in the last couple of weeks, and those fires are still not contained. And we certainly hope that the professionals who are working on that, not only from the fire service, but the military is helping with that. And obviously, there's been a lot of loss from a human perspective, from a property perspective, millions of dollars worth of damage and things that can never be replaced. But here in the Commonwealth, we had a very busy fall. There were more acres that burned in October and November in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts than had burned in the prior 2 years of 2022 and 2023. So people don't normally think of Massachusetts as a big forest fire location, but it does happen a lot. And that's why we've got all the assets that we do. Sometimes people, when they look at our fleet, when they look at, all of the equipment that we have, they question, do you really need all of this equipment? Do you need all these trucks? Do you
Not all the time.
No, but when we do, you're going to want to make sure that we have it.
Yeah, that one day when we need it. Yeah, no, that stuff is all immensely complex, in terms of everything that has to be considered, and the amount of people power that it takes to deal with these kinds of fires.
And we're very fortunate that Massachusetts has an excellent mutual aid system, not only for brush fires, structure fires, natural disasters, medical emergencies, but we work and we train with our mutual aid partners, our contiguous communities, but also, again, the state resources. And we all work very collegially together. When there are big fires, we're working on the fire line with folks from full-time departments, on-call departments like ours, state agencies. Sometimes we're getting assets from other states that have come in to assist. In the same way, there have been assets from the Department of Conservation and Recreation that have gone to fires out in Oregon, that have gone to fires out in Texas, other parts of the country. We've sent resources, and so from time to time, sometimes we need to receive resources as well.
That reminds me, in terms of the whole thing about mutual aid, do we give a lot of mutual aid? I mean, are we just a user nation? Or are we a donor nation too?
We are both a receiver of mutual aid as well as a giver of mutual aid. And you also need to look at our operations from a holistic standpoint. It's not just fire emergencies that we respond to. We also do medical emergencies.
True.
This day where we're in studio taping, earlier the ambulance responded to one of our neighboring towns and transported a patient from their community to a hospital. So we send ambulances, we receive ambulances. We send fire trucks. Occasionally we receive fire trucks. We're pretty self-sufficient from a fire standpoint. More and more in the last couple of years, we've changed our response protocols so that we are using more fire mutual aid earlier, whether it's as a rapid intervention team, so that if something happens and we need to effect a rescue of a firefighter operating on the scene, we've got a mutual aid company who's standing by, and their sole responsibility is stand by with tools ready to go, so if a mayday is called, they can go right in and try and rescue that downed firefighter. We receive mutual aid a lot for incident management. Sometimes a neighboring town chief or a neighboring town chief officer, whether it be assistant chief, deputy chief, will come in and they may help as a safety officer or an accountability officer or as an operations officer in a particular division of a fire. So we send resources, we receive resources, but we're not just a taker. It is mutual. We're both sending and receiving.
Okay, sounds good. And I'm glad to hear it's collegial and that everybody pulls together. Just as an aside kind of thing, what are our flood risks? I could remember October 2005. I think it was you were.
It certainly was.
Whoa! We had a flood from, that was memorable, and I actually have wonderful pictures of that whole experience.
You do.
But what are the flood risks now?
So if you looked at that same map that we saw earlier in terms of the green areas and the yellow areas, there's a lot of overlap. When we were doing our hazard mitigation plan update this past year, as we worked with an outside consultant, and that plan was adopted by the select board, and it's been sent to MEMA for review, and from there it goes on to FEMA for adoption. Flooding is one of the risks that Holliston faces. We have historic data from things like the rain event of October of 2025, where at one point there were 12 streets in town that were impassable due to flooding. The hydraulic pressure literally lifted up the tight tank behind Dunkin' Donuts.
I've got a great picture of that.
Our substation right by Dunkin' Donuts was inaccessible. It was underwater. But that's not the last time that the Gates Fire Station has been underwater.
Yeah.
There are flood risks in Holliston. There are not only is it around the water areas, like if you were to take the flooding from that October rain event and you were to overlay it with our streams and our tributaries that go through town, you would see a correlation. Like the reason that there were so many streets in the Queens that were flooded is because of where the canal comes through.
Yeah.
But we've also seen it from other events that have happened when some land clearing occurred on a property in Ashland a couple of years ago. Their runoff contributed to flooding in the Stagecoach development. And it made conditions that had been existing previously that much worse.
Yeah.
So decisions have consequences, whether it's a decision to clear land for development, whether it's to cut down trees for a solar array. You have to look at what the impact of where's the water going to go, and the water that used to go down into the ground, now that if it's just running off, where's that going to head?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we need to think about that one too. We'll have to do another show on that. Floods or water everywhere. I mean, that's the thing. We have a high water table. At some seasons you can watch the rain and the groundwater and the rain meet, you know, at any rate. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
All right. Okay, that's a wrap as far as forest fires, wildfires in Holliston. Some really good information there. I hope you'll take it to heart. And we'll see you next time. Thanks so much.